is more than just what we eat. It is the foundation of our cultures, our economies, and our relationship with the natural world. But today's food systems are fragile and unequal, and the pandemic has impacted the most vulnerable among us. But we know what we need to do to get back on track. We have an opportunity to build back better than ever, and we can set a course to make real change for the benefit of all people. Because a strong food system means
no matter your race, no matter your class,
women and men have equal opportunities to access nutritious food.
Every month, every day of the week.
Even during a pandemic.
We all have a responsibility to act. We must think and act differently. Because together, we can build a just and resilient world.
Where no one is left behind.
Where no one is left behind.
Where no one is left behind. Join us today.
Great. Look, welcome. My name is Alison Cairns. I'm the partnership lead for the UN Food System Summit Secretariat. And welcome to this co-hosted event with the World Benchmarking Alliance and hosted by, on this great platform, the SDG 2 tent. Now, we'd like to take you through a number of different segments here. There are three. I'm going to talk about the Food System Summit, and also a colleague of mine will go into a bit more detail. We'll then talk about business engagement in the summit, in particular sort of focus areas that we have. And then we'll talk in the third segment around the measurement dimension. We also have two opportunities for question and answers throughout this session, and you'll be able to, as we go through the course of the presentation, go into the chat box and put your questions in there, and that can be accessed by clicking on the red button, which I believe is under the agenda icon. We will also have a chat session after the main presentation, which you'll be able to access, and I'll reiterate that at the end. And also, just so you know, we are recording this session, and it will be, it can be shared with you, but it will also be part of the media library here. So what I'd like to do initially is to set out a bit more about the Food System Summit. So just go on to a few slides for you. In terms of the overall outcomes that we're looking for from the summit, which will take place in September this year, and there'll be a pre-summit in July this year as well. We are looking for a statement of action from the UN General Secretary that will really be the guiding narrative on a more equitable and sustainable food system. Secondly, we want a large number of member states making commitments around an enabling environment to drive food system transformation in country. We're also looking for a bold set of multi-stakeholder commitments and actions and building coalitions, and that's where we really see the role of the private sector and being part of those coalitions, helping to shape them and making those commitments. We also want to ensure that we have vibrant communities, in particular youth, engaging in the summit, but also taking the momentum forward as well. And then finally, we'd want to ensure that there are provisions for a mechanism for regular review and follow-up, because we don't want this to be a summit which is all about commitments and then nothing happens after that. This can't be what this summit is all about. It's meant to be a people summit, so we're going broad and really engaging as many constituencies as possible, and also a solution summit where we are talking about actions and we're talking about solutions. We're taking forward solutions. This just gives you a bit of an overview of the different component parts of the Food System Summit, because it's quite complicated. But you can see what we're seeking to do. We want to have a champions network to really mobilize broad support for the summit. We have a UN task force We also have a scientific group which will be validating the action areas which are emerging from the action tracks, and I'll talk about those in a moment, and the dialogues, which are a really critical part of the summit process. Now, in terms of the dialogues, we've asked every country in the world to hold a series of national dialogues, which are supposed to be multi-stakeholder and therefore where you are headquartered or where your subsidiaries are in country, there's an opportunity to engage in those national dialogues. To date, we've got over 100 countries going ahead with these dialogues, and we expect to see at least another 50 before the summit taking them forward. But these will continue as well, so some will come online after the summit. We've also got a number of global dialogues, as you can see, on environment. We're having one on trade as well, which might be of interest, as well as on producers, really mobilizing the farmer community throughout the food system as well. We also have a number of independent dialogues, really encouraging constituencies across the globe to hold these independent dialogues as well, because as I said, we want this to be a people summit, so we want as much engagement as possible. Now, in terms of particular sort of focus areas for commitments and actions, we have 5 action tracks around ensuring safe and nutritious food for all, shifting to sustainable consumption patterns, boosting nature positive production, advancing equitable livelihoods, and building resilience to vulnerability, shocks, and stress. Now, of course, we've had to cut the cake some way in terms of the Food System Summit, but they are integrated. And there are a number of cross-cutting levers as well. Innovation, which I'll introduce my colleague shortly to talk to you a bit more in detail about. There's finance, there's human rights, and there's also gender. These are the action track leadership teams, and I know there's a lot of information here, but we'll be able to share these slides with you so you can look at in detail. But effectively, these action tracks are led by civil society, and we also have a youth vice chair on each of these action tracks, as well as a UN anchor agency and members of the scientific community in each of these action tracks. But what's critically important is that they are multi-stakeholder. So we have business representation in all of these multi-stakeholder action tracks, as well as a number of other communities, including Indigenous people, producers, and so on. Over the last few months, we've been gathering ideas about what could be game-changing solutions or clusters to be able to drive forward food systems transformation. And as you can see, there have been many ideas that have come in from different quarters, and we've been going through these ideas and really clustering them into different areas, which I'll show you in a minute. But essentially, we have been gathering these ideas. They'll be, if you like, consolidated, and then we're going to be creating some coalitions of action, and they will also find their way into this Secretary General statement that I talked about very early on in terms of the outcome, one of the outcomes of the summit. But what we think is exciting about this journey is hopefully it's bringing a more systemic thinking to all constituencies who are involved in this process, and hopefully a better outcome for the food system as we go forward across social, environmental, and also health. So these are the action areas that have emerged. I won't go through them all in detail, but essentially they are identifying pathways for a more sustainable food system. We've got another wave of solution areas that are coming through, and if you see areas which you think there are gaps or that need strengthened, then we would like to hear from you, and we can share more detail in terms of how do you concretely do that after this call through our colleagues at the World Benchmarking Alliance. This is a series of consultations over the next sort of couple of months that you can also join. We will also be having some specific private sector forums as well. There is also a CEO event which takes place on the 7th of June, and I'm sure that Diane will be shortly sharing more detail in relation to that engagement from business. So what I'd like to do, hopefully that's set it out. And again, I know there's a lot of information there, but just to really give you the context for this discussion, I would like to now introduce my colleague, James Lomax. And James is working with the Summit Secretariat team. He is advising on the food systems and agriculture to the Secretariat. So I'd like to invite James, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alison. So I was trying to think what I could add after what you've said. I think what you've done is a very good job in, if you like, putting out the architecture. Now, one of the things that I think we need to basically be clear about, and then I'll get onto the innovation lever, is the fact that we have, if you like, an incredible opportunity for those of us working on sustainable food and agriculture with this summit. Now, 2020 was supposed to be the super year for nature. Well, that didn't happen for obvious reasons, hence why we're all spending our time with our eyes glued to the Zoom. But for us, and something that I'd really like to get across to all of you here is that this year really is, I believe, a tipping point when it comes to issues around environment, issues around food systems specifically. If we look at what we have, as Alison has just said, what do we have, what we're working towards with the summit, I believe, and I think we all do, we can recognize that this is an incredible, if you like, point of departure for the next 9 years, going up to 2030, looking at the plurality and the opportunity that taking a food systems approach brings to really accelerating our journey towards achieving the Agenda 2030. Not only do we have the summit in September, we also have the high-level dialogue on energy this year, which is a really interesting juxtaposition with food systems. That's the first time that's really been spoken about for 40 years. We've got then the Rio Convention COP, so the one that we all know, which is the climate change one, that's going to be in December. But we also have the Land Degradation Neutrality COP, and the post-2020 biodiversity framework will be renegotiated and agreed at another COP as well, just after the summit. So if you like, we're kind of galvanizing ourselves for a period of change. And that's why I think this summit's so exciting. We have the dialogues, we have the action tracks, etc. And let me just focus in very briefly on the innovation lever. And the innovation lever, as is with the finance, the gender, and the human rights levers, it's designed, if you like, to kind of bring in this issue of systemic thinking throughout the existing action tracks. So it's galvanizing stakeholders to be innovative. The innovation one, for example, around several things, and we've split it up into 4 quadrants, and this is actually being led by the World Economic Forum, and there's already a really big and motivated group around this. So the 4 quadrants are innovation in data and digital. So how do we enable digital and data innovation whilst mitigating against unintended consequences, and design for inclusivity, equitable shared value, scalability, and interoperability for a common purpose. So how can we use the digital ecosystem to bring innovation more to the fore? And then you've got, if you like, the more, how can I say that, the more traditional issue when we're looking at innovation. So scientific and technological innovation. So how do we enable advances in science and technology in support of the 5 action tracks? And then there's a third quadrant looking specifically around regional innovation ecosystems that can really sort of start to elevate this idea of working together, empowering a wide variety of stakeholders to adopt at scale. And then the fourth quadrant, which I think is really interesting, and it comes to the how rather than the what. So we understand kind of what we're doing and what we have to do. The trouble is we don't know how, if you like, to get there. And this is the tricky question, because we're asking, therefore, then stakeholders, businesses, farmers, governments to innovate in the way that they look at their institutions, the way they build policies, etc. So this, I think, is a really, I think, quite a, excuse the pun, innovative approach to mainstreaming innovation in a summit like this. So yeah, I think in incredible opportunities. I think this is very interesting for the World Benchmarking Alliance too. And yeah, I think this is an opportunity. 2021 is really the time where we can start to, lean in on this aspect. So I'll hand over to Alison. Thank you very much for your time.
Great. So look, thank you very much, James. Really helpful for you to share a bit more on the innovation lever. And I'd like to hand over now to Diane Haldorff, who's Managing Director of the Food and Nature Programme at WBCSD, to talk about the private sector engagement at the summit. And unfortunately, Agnes Kalibata couldn't be here today. But if you speak to her about the private sector, she repeatedly says it's really critical that we have private sector engagement in the summit and bringing forward commitments and actions, because this is where commitments, solutions will actually come from, private sector and all its diversity. So Diane, would you like to, it'd be great if you could share a bit more about the private sector engagement at the summit.
Hey, Alison, thank you so much. Really happy to do this here today. And as you said earlier, just let me share also a quick thanks to the organizers of the SDG tent. It's so cool to see this go digital as well. And a quick thank you also to the World Benchmarking Alliance, and of course you, Alison, and the Food Systems Summit for bringing us all together to talk about these priority areas for private sector engagement as we head into the summit events for the year. I'll be speaking today, as Alison said, on behalf of the Private Sector Guiding Group, which the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, my organization, helps to convene. We do this convening because Peter Bacher, who's our CEO, sits on the advisory council to the Food Systems Summit, in part to help mobilize the voice of global business. And through the Private Sector Guiding Group, we're really looking to mobilize businesses of all sizes through platforms such as ours and others across the globe. So let me just give you a bit of overview. But actually, before I jump into that, let me just add a quick piece on the World Benchmarking Alliance as well. I should add that I sit on the expert review committee of the World Benchmarking Food and Agriculture benchmark, where WBA has identified the most influential 350 food and agriculture companies that have been included to consider how they, through both their actions and the engagement of their value chains, can really translate action through clear business asks and help to transform this full system. This private sector accountability mechanism is really, really important as we think about how we will be measuring performance of companies as we look to the types of steps that are needed to make the changes that will be required. So I know Viktoria is going to be speaking in more detail shortly about the benchmark's recently launched methodology report, how it can encourage food and agriculture companies and their value chains to set out those types of specific actions, not to meet expectations of stakeholders, although of course that's really important, but as I said, to really help transform the food system. That is the work that we lead as well within WBCSD, where we're working with leading companies to strengthen performance, drive collective action, and support system transformation, both through long-term projects on things like shifting diets and transforming agriculture and working on equity and livelihoods, but also through advocacy efforts, such as much of what we're doing heading into the Food System Summit, and through that this year into events such as the CBD COP and the Climate COP 26. So we recognize that this work and the actions and leadership by business is truly a journey. We have to show others, lead by example, but then also really participate with all stakeholders in what it means to create a healthy and sustainable food system for all. Much of this work to engage businesses in the run-up to the Food Systems Summit is in this mechanism, as Alison described it, called the Private Sector Guiding Group. It's a group of 27 business associations from across the food industry globally, and it meets every several weeks to discuss what are the next steps that we need to do to directly mobilize and engage the types of companies that are members of all of these different platform organizations, and to engage companies appropriately directly into some of the big game-changing solutions that will be taking place, featured all the way through the summit in September. The Private Sector Guiding Group has developed a business call to action. It's identifying and amplifying these game-changing solutions, and it is playing an important role to help drive the collective actions necessary for sustainable food systems. Together, very much in partnership around the work of the lever, the innovation lever, for example, as James was referring to, and the 5 action tracks of the Food Systems Summit, in addition to other critical enabler levers such as finance, gender, and human rights. The terms of engagement for business leaders developed by the Private Sector Guiding Group has been vetted already across stakeholders and with business leaders themselves, and it's designed to support a joint statement of ambition ahead of what will be the pre-summit event in July, taking place 19, 20, and 21 July in Rome. We want to use that to build momentum and further mobilize business leaders around these steps that require a much greater level of ambition. To bring business leaders along on this journey and help them recognize the scale of ambition, as well as help shape it where they themselves have leadership contributions, we are convening a series of 5 CEO consultations. 3 of these CEO consultations have already taken place. I'll speak about the most recent one in just a moment. And the 4th meeting is scheduled for the 7th of June. Many of you who are participating here may know CEOs who you would like to nominate into that process. And we'd love to get that information in the chat here so that we can create further and broad engagement for businesses, large, medium, and small, across the whole system globally. The CEO consultations have a really important role to play because it allows CEOs and leading business executives, leadership within these businesses, to directly engage in the Food System Summit process. They can share their perspectives. They can bring the business lens to the urgency and the action needed and the experiences that they have with their global supply chains and value chains. And through that, help to highlight both challenges and important opportunities for the food systems transformations. At each meeting of these CEO consultations, the Food System Summit Secretariat and the Action Track leadership teams all engage and contribute to talk about what their latest updates are and how the CEOs themselves can also gain insight from the formal process of preparing for the summit. These CEO consultations provide a venue to discuss key priorities as well for the business community at the pre-competitive level so that we can further drive collective action. Most recently, at the 3rd CEO consultation, which was held at the end of March, early April, the Private Sector Guiding Group took all of the work that has been evolving from the action tracks and the levers for change and created an overlay of 9 emergent areas where business can really collectively take action. We were able to then focus the conversation into these 9 areas to help drive forward the level of ambition and the types of targets that business should look at to address those types of areas. Now, these 9 solution areas were really selected because more ambition is needed or more acceleration was needed. They weren't intended to be all encompassing or to duplicate the efforts really coming out of the action tracks already, but to complement that work and to recognize that there's other really important issues such as tackling food waste, improving food safety, looking at nutrition standards in workforce globally, and other things. All of that work will, of course, continue as well. But this focusing effort, as I said, was to create greater ambition and coalitions of action in areas such as building a global initiative to address soil health and carbon sequestration, addressing what it means to have high quality, diverse protein sources and sustainable production methods, looking at innovative funds to address global food loss, particularly addressing post-harvest loss, as well as climate-smart food systems funding, looking at multi-channel nutrition and eco-labeling that can promote healthy and sustainable diets at point of sale and out of home, thinking about ways to accelerate diversity in crops at scale. What's the role that product formulation can take in that, for example? How can we increase the production and consumption of fortified foods? How can we restore degraded landscapes? Doing something incredibly ambitious, like looking at perhaps 1,000 landscapes for 1 billion people. And then also, what would it take to build a coalition to achieve 100% living income in food and agricultural value chains by 2030? So these types of solution areas demonstrate the important collaboration for the private sector working with the Food Systems Summit Secretariat and Action Track leaders, as well as stakeholders from civil society, from academia, from science, et cetera, to really think through how do we scale the urgency and the ambition in these types of areas. We'd love to hear your thoughts about these solution areas, ideas where you and your company can help lead and drive business engagement, where we can think about new coalitions that could be raised perhaps into the next CEO consultations. And of course, as I said, if you know CEOs who want to engage into this process, help us make sure that we include them in the next session coming up on June 7th. Your feedback is really important in helping us shape the results and the outcomes for our work, and are ultimately going to be key to how we create and mobilize the business movement to help achieve these transformations. So before we go to Q&A, we'd love to get your feedback immediately, here and now, through a poll. On the screen, you should be able to see a red circle with a graph in it. And I'd like you to look in your upper red corner. If you see that, click on that graph in that red circle, and you'll see our polling question for today. Which are the top 3 most important areas where you think your company can help drive collective action? If you can get into that poll now, we'll give you just a moment here to share your responses on those 3 most important areas for you. And then in just a moment here, we'll go to those poll results so we can see those. And then Alison and I can reflect on those as we head into Q&A next. So if we're starting to see enough responses to that poll, perhaps we can go ahead and look at those poll results. Oh, great. Look, nice to see some of these responses coming. Excellent. So driving health, living income, excellent. Protein diversification, excellent. It's great to see where soil health, living income, diversification are getting such a response. We're starting to see some similarities occur across all of these as well, but this is great. Keep the information coming back. We're going to use this, not just in our Q&A today, but also as we continue our next steps, shaping the agenda for the next CEO consultation and continuing to think about the types of stakeholders and partners that we can mobilize in developing these collective action coalitions for greater ambition. So with that, perhaps we can close the polling results and move over into Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Diane, for that very enthusiastic and passionate presentation about the summit and business engagement and the importance of it. It's really quite critical. It was interesting to see those polling results. And there are a few questions coming in, but I can also please do encourage people to go to the chat box, press on the red button and put in your questions. But I do have a few follow-up questions for you, Diane. So one of them would be, it seems like there are a lot of solution areas already developed. Is it too late to actually provide more input into those? So it'd be great to get your take on that. But I think I would also like to just ask you to unpack a few of those solution areas that you talked about, you referenced briefly, particularly on the living income, because I think that's the social side is very new to really push for. We are quite well established in terms of the environmental mobilization of business, and clearly we want to go further. But I think on the social side, it's an area to be developed as well as on the nutrition side. So it'd be great to unpack those. So if you could answer those two questions initially.
Sure, happy to, Alison, gladly. First of all, not too late. It's definitely not too late. There's going to be several waves of collecting these types of really big opportunities. These examples were ones that we'll be working on through the month of April. We're expecting a second wave of great ideas to come in by the beginning of May. And really the intent is to lift as many of these as possible because action's needed everywhere. These are just some examples of really significant collective action, things that we haven't yet started to really address. So let me move on to your second question there, Alison, and unpack some of these, as you said. One of the reasons that we've included them is not only are they a build from what we're hearing come out of the action tracks and these cross-cutting levers, but they're areas that, as you started to say, don't necessarily have enough momentum yet. There's a huge step change that would have to take place to achieve this incredibly ambitious goal, for example, of 100% living income and value chains by 2030. That's going to take the work of businesses working together with governments, working together with labor organizations, working together with civil society to think through in agricultural value chains, what does it mean to actually create new income streams, raise income levels, look at ways of sharing equity across value chains in ways that haven't yet been accomplished. So that's an example of what we'll need to be digging into, for example, on this 100% living income opportunity or challenge area. But it's actually really linked to one of the other areas that you highlighted that I referenced before, and that is a global initiative to address healthy soil and carbon sequestration. If we can start to create a market for healthy soil as a carbon asset, we could drive a whole different income stream for the provisioning of those ecosystem services to farmers. And that is the type of different level of thinking about what does it mean to create additional income streams for the significant contributions that farmers make, not just in the crops that they harvest, but equally in the services that they provide to planetary health, to carbon sequestration, to healthy soils, water retention, et cetera. So we can think about income through preserving healthy soils, through creating carbon asset income for farmers. That can also link to another area, such as thinking about crop diversification. It can be very expensive and risky for farmers to transition to crops that maybe aren't as globally in demand. But as we raise demand for a more broad diversity of crops, we'll start to see nutrition diversification improvements. We'll probably start to see community health improvements because there's going to be more types of crops available at local market, not just into global value chains. But equally, we're starting to create diversity of income again for farmers. So we're thinking about what's the role of business in planning for driving more diversification away from just the big major global crops, which will of course continue, but corn, rice, wheat, potatoes. How do we start to think about other types of nutritious, diverse ingredients that are used maybe historically or in a local context from a local diet standpoint that could be driven for global application as well? So Alison, that was a lot of information. I could dive into each one, but let me pause there and go and see if there's questions.
No, that's really helpful. And I think it's important to really unpack these, because that's when it starts getting concrete in terms of what we're hoping the business community will really get engaged in. There's another couple of questions. There's one here actually on the pre-summit and summit, so I'll take that question. So firstly, the difference between, so the question is what's the difference between the pre-summit and the summit? Well, the pre-summit is going to be over 3 days. There's going to be a very small in-person Rome event, but it's going to be very much hybrid. So there's going to be a huge hybrid digital dimension, because we want as many people involved as well. There'll be a particular session for the business constituency, and we'll have the different constituencies reporting back, if you like, and sharing what they're bringing to the summit, also what they need from others as well. In terms of really accelerating their engagement in food system transformation. We will also have a few announcements, probably about 5 or so, of the coalitions that we've been cultivating and sort of developing, and particularly accelerating really over the next sort of few months, and they will be launched also. There'll be a couple of heads of state there, and ministerials also. As we go into September and the summit, this is where you will see the bulk of the announcements for the summit made, the Secretary General's statement, which is really going to be quite critical. But again, there's going to be space for all constituencies. And again, it's going to be hybrid. This is a people's summit. I said that when I opened up the session. So we want to engage as many as possible, because food means something to everyone. So it'd be great to really think about not just your consumers and in your ecosystems, but also your employees, your staff, really engaging them as part of the summit process as well, I think would be great to be able to do. A final question for you, Diane, and then we will move on with our next speaker. We'll go to Viktoria. But you talked about an ambition statement. It'd be great to understand more about that, and also how this companies here can get involved. Over.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alison. Happy to share more with folks as a follow-up. The statement of ambition is still being finalized, and it's intended to create the level of leadership that business, in order to be able to contribute at a food system summit level, needs to demonstrate. It has to be across multiple action tracks. It has to be incredibly relevant to their value chains that they work in and to the markets that they service. And we want to be able to use that to create, here's what it means to really engage. Here's what it means to really lead. These are, these are big opportunity areas. We don't want, there's room for everybody. Let me be very clear. We don't need only the biggest leaders to step up, because we of course need action with everybody. But we want to be able to acknowledge and recognize those who are playing a really significant role in leading their sector, in leading their value chain, and leading their market. There's leaders of all different shapes and sizes, and we need each of them. And this ambition statement starts to set out what that looks like across, very well aligned to the areas of the action tracks around nutrition, around nature positive agriculture, around equity, resilience, etc. So certainly it's something we can share more information on, but we're really excited to see the level of engagement and leadership for business coming into this space.
Well, look, Diane, thank you very much for your contribution in sharing the information on private sector engagement. It's really exciting, the momentum that we're getting, and clearly we want to mobilize even more businesses to become involved. So thank you very much.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Alison.
Super. Well, I'd now like to invite the World Benchmarking Alliance's Viktoria de Bourbon de Parme, who is the Food System Transformation Lead at the World Benchmarking Alliance. Viktoria.
Thank
Hi
you,
there.
Alison. Yes.
Hi, it's great that you can, that we are co-hosting this. And as you know, and I'd just like to make it clear, we've been working very closely with Viktoria and her team around the World Benchmarking Alliance, and really how the World Benchmarking Alliance and its initiative around the agri-food sector can really be brought into the summit as well. And we've been looking at the areas of action for business and how do the indicators that the World Benchmarking Alliance is looking at match up to those. So hopefully we'll be working more closely as we go through to the summit itself. But I'd now like to invite you to share more about the World Benchmarking Alliance.
Thank you very much for those kind words, Alison, and really a pleasure to be co-hosting this event with you. And a big thank you to SDG Tent for hosting us today on this innovative platform. And I'm echoing all the enthusiasm that has been spoken before. I think this is a huge year for food. We have this one-off UN Food Systems Summit that is really bringing momentum. So there's lots of engagement have been happening already since last year. And as Diane has said, now the private sector has been fully involved, and really concrete topics of solution areas are emerging. And so hopefully we will see more of those in July. And you are, as you've heard, you are very welcome, companies that you are representing, to really input to that and really be co-designer of that statement. So get involved and really looking forward to see what will come out of that and the ambitions in September. What happens after September, right? Well, we have this great summit date, but as Alison has pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, one of the 5 crucial outcomes of the UN Food Systems Summit is that there should be a regular review and a follow-up to this, that we keep this momentum going in the decade of action, in the 2030 agenda. And that is hopefully where something like the World Benchmarking Alliance's work around indexes and benchmarks can come into play. So I'd love to take you all on board and to tell you a bit more about how we are developing our work and how that possibly will fit in to the activities of the summit. So the World Benchmarking Alliance is really set up from the SDGs at its heart. So we are measuring what companies are doing to achieve those SDGs. We all know SDGs are very broadly framed, so we really translated that into actionable asks from companies. And we measure and compare what companies are doing in that space. We focus on the bigger companies, so for these benchmarks. And many of you who are watching today are probably already have been involved in roundtables, in consultations. As you know, we're in the middle of the data collection phase. Some of you might be new here. So really excited to tell you a bit more in today's session. The benchmarks that we are producing are free and publicly available. We are an independent organization. We are funded by governments and philanthropic institutions. And we really want to create a momentum and drive this narrative of leadership, of recognizing leadership, of sharing best practices with the benchmarks that we draw up. So we work with several systems, not only the food system. So we've translated the 17 SDGs into really the private sector systems that need to change. And you see them on your screen on the right-hand side, the 7 systems that are crucial for change. And we are, of course, here on the food focus, but which is intricately linked to the social revolution, if you will, the social transformation that we are seeing on human rights, on gender, which we've also really included in the methodology and the way we research what companies are doing. So broad range of stakeholders. Stakeholder consultation is very important to us, and in the methodology development, but also in realizing impact. And once you have a benchmark, what happens after that? We've always really tried to follow the global agendas around this. So to really see where expectations lie and how we can translate that for companies into actionable asks. And as you see in our name, in our title, we are an alliance. So as I said, we really want to gather organizations together, create collectives, and to create this alliance of change. So we've actually have more than 200 organizations that are part of our alliance. That includes business associations, investors, NGOs, consultants, to really create this ecosystem for change. So really to have the benchmarks on the one hand, to identify areas where progress is not happening quick enough, and then have this alliance of stakeholders where some can really on a consultative level can guide companies to how performance can be improved, but also on different levels with governments. We're very active on policy levels as well, into seeing where maybe a more of an enabling environment needs to be developed. So benchmarking cycle we really see as a loop which has started with the SDGs. So we really have this clear agenda for 2030, and by mobilizing private sector, there's which is crucial for that change, which is crucial for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And benchmarking hopefully is an interesting tool to really identify what's happening and to share best practices and identifying the gaps where more action needs to be done. So on food and agriculture, we're very excited. For the past 3 years, we've developed a overarching benchmark. We didn't do this alone. There are many fantastic index initiatives out there, reporting frameworks. Many of those are part of our alliance. And we've tried to integrate what is out there and what kind of agendas have been formulated. And also try to really take in now this summit momentum, which are the areas that are crucial to drive that change. And as Alison mentioned, at the beginning, it's not only about environment, it's social is a very important aspect of it as well, as is health. So those three integrated areas we've tried to include in the way we are assessing companies. So we assess them on a very broad, holistic agenda, and we assess companies from a very broad scale, really from farm to fork. And I will tell you a bit more as well on how that's been come about. So within the food and agricultural team at WBA, we have this overarching benchmark. We draw upon a lot of the knowledge that are spotlight indexes that have been around already for several years, focusing on specific sectors like the seed sector and the seafood sector. So drawing upon those learnings of how benchmarks are best designed to really measure progress, create accountability, and make sure that progress is happening. So this food and agriculture benchmark, which we have developed and which we will be publishing at the UN Food Systems Summit in September, is an overarching benchmark. As I said, we haven't come up with indicators on our own. We've really collectively drawn upon the knowledge, science-based targets that are out there, great indicators that have been developed by the Force 500, by the Access to Nutrition Index, and many others that you see on your screen, to really aggregate all of that and to measure these biggest, most influential companies on those crucial areas. And so who are the companies in scope? Well, the audience here represents many of them. And as you know, so we've selected 350 companies as the most crucial drivers of this change. That has been a consultative process as well with stakeholders to really identify globally who are the most important drivers of this change. Obviously, a size of the company was crucial for that, but also its global span. So these 350 companies are headquartered in 41 different countries. So you see that it's a very broad global span, and it encompasses different industries, all the way from agricultural inputs to food retailers. And in the agendas, what we've seen coming out, as I said, the summit has drawn to our attention that food systems are crucial. It's a systemic approach. And there's been many fantastic reports on this, and to identify which are the important topics. And that is what we've been building upon when we have developed this methodology. So which is pillared in 3 critical thematic areas: so environment, nutrition, and social inclusion. So the environmental impacts and social impacts, but also the health, the nutritional aspect are very key. This is a busy slide, but I wanted to share it with you because it really makes it very concrete, as Diane and Alison explained in the Q&A as well. It really helps to bring it down to details as well. So Diane has spoken about solution areas that have emerged from these CEO meetings, from the action track solution areas. And if you zoom in on these specific dimensions that we will already assessing this year, you will see that soil health and agrobiodiversity, which is key for carbon sequestration, is in our environmental pillar, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, but also the sustainable production of animal protein and also animal protein diversification is an element that we are looking at when we are assessing these companies. So in that environmental space, there's very clear links to the solution areas that are emerging and indicators that we use how to measure that. And so hopefully when after the summit, this can be a tool to really see how progress is happening and where more action needs to be done. I'd also like to zoom in on the nutrition pillar because the availability of healthy foods is really critical. You see solution areas coming forward around reformulation and how to improve the accessibility and affordability of healthy foods, but also the importance of labeling and responsible marketing and really guiding consumers to healthy choices. And then in the social pillar, there was lots of talk in the previous presentations about living wage, about this fantastic solution area and really commitment set that is emerging from the private sector itself to really progress on ensuring 100% living wage across supply chains, which is a fantastic commitment and really an ambitious target and which is getting lots of traction we see from other stakeholders as well. So it's very exciting to see that is being picked up. And so this will be a recurring thing. So the first benchmark will be published in September of this year, which will be sort of a get-go, a start to see where we are now. And that together with these commitments and ambition statements will then drive us in the years to come to be able to measure and to measure progress and to really review where the private sector is on realizing these ambitions. But as I said, we don't want to do this on our own as an organization. So engagement, consultations, and really bringing multi-stakeholder platforms together and really seeing companies as a partner in this journey to really guide companies in how we can do progress is very crucial. And that is why within this summit setting, there's so much possibility. So you have this great platform and this great event this year that is unique in bringing these diverse sets together. And exactly as has been said, it's not only about big businesses, it's about small and medium-priced enterprises as well. When we are publishing our benchmark results, we will also publish scoring guidelines, which will be sort of a self-assessment tool as well for others who are not in scope but would like to see how they are measuring up. So really to identify with this first benchmark, who are the front runners of food systems and what are the best practices that others can learn from and that can really accelerate that progress. So there's so much traction happening this year. The G7 has a big food agenda as well to really feed into these efforts of the UN Food Systems Summit that we're working on, has been highlighted at COP26. Finally, there's a big focus on the food industry as well. And of course, the Nutrition for Growth Summit at the end of the year, really focusing on that healthy, on that nutrition pillar as well. So really excited to engage with you all on this, in this journey of transition and transformation as partners, as I said, and to really see how this summit as well can really accelerate all those efforts that have already been mobilized by many of your companies on a voluntary basis, and to really see how we can scale that up and we can make sure that is holistically put forward. So please get in touch. You see my email on the screen as well, and it's on our website. We will be sharing the slides later on. So yeah, very excited to have you here as participants, and looking forward to meeting a few of you in the chat session as well afterwards. Thank you.
Great. Look, thank you, Viktoria. That's fantastic. And we really do think from a Food Systems Summit point of view that the World Benchmarking Alliance is, this is a real innovation, and it's going to be really helpful in terms of guiding and driving sort of change going forward. And I've got a few questions that have come in I'd like to ask you. Firstly is, who can actually use the World Benchmarking Alliance data?
Yeah. Yeah, really good question. Yeah, the data is really absolutely freely and publicly available. So as I mentioned, we're funded by governments and philanthropic institutions. So companies don't buy in or buy out of being benchmarked. And for that reason, thanks to our funders, we can really make this accessible to everyone, individuals as well. And if organizations are part of our alliance, they are updated more frequently. But it's really that there's no barrier between the information we share with them and others. It's really for everyone there to see on our website.
Great. Look, that's really helpful to know. Another question is, why is the UN Food Systems Summit important for your benchmark?
Yeah, well, hopefully I'd like to turn it around well, first of all, the UN Food Systems Summit is so important for all of us, for every stakeholder working in the food space. And all of us have a role to play. And companies have a role to play, NGOs have a role to play, governments. And we as an humble organization just try to bring forward a tool and a mechanism of really to measure, to bring together data, to make it transparent. And by having the summit, it's about momentum. It's about getting all of those diverse stakeholders together and really to building coalitions on these solution areas, but also to have more clearer guidance on the agendas. So the agendas have throughout the years and the build up have emerged. And for us, it has identified around 45 different indicators. But it's really helpful that now that as we're coming closer to the summit, is becoming even more concrete. And as Diane mentioned, 9 solution areas. And so really make it specific for companies. What are the mostly important things that companies should be focusing on? And so I think that is crucial into really dictating the agenda, and that can really help us into seeing where focus should lie on the measurement. What should we measure? What should we keep reviewing in the years to come?
Great. Just one quick question before we just go into just to close. You talked about the 45 or so benchmark indicators, but how will you accommodate the emerging sort of targets? Because as we know, it's not quite as straightforward as COP. There isn't a 1.5 degrees already agreed for each element of the food system. So how will you accommodate that? You've got, I don't know, 15 seconds to respond, and then I'll close the session.
No, really good question. Yeah, I'll be very brief. So after every iteration, we always look at the methodology again, and we try to incorporate the latest developments. So new science-based targets, new emerging focus areas, developments. So after this iteration, we will again redevelop the methodology again, and really to make it aligned with the global agenda that is out there.
Look, thank you very much, Viktoria. I hope you realise that this is such a big year for food to really accelerate change, and that the private sector and the work that you do in your companies within your value chain is really quite critical to this change. We want you engaged. We want to get you involved. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank the World Benchmarking Alliance, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, of course, the SDG 2 tent for hosting this session. We've got a little chat for the next half an hour. If you go to there's an arrow there, just click on that and you can enter the chat room. So thank you again, and have a good day.
Thank you, Alison.